The morning the Liberty Corps system failed began like any other cold, rain-soaked Tuesday in Huntsville, Alabama, until the lights inside the executive auditorium of Patriot Grid Systems flickered once, then twice, and the entire room went silent in that expensive, suffocating way only powerful people understand when money, reputation, and national pride are all about to collapse in public. The auditorium sat on the 42nd floor of a glass and steel headquarters overlooking wet highways, defense contractor campuses, and the distant gray outline of Redstone Arsenal, with American flags standing on both sides of the stage, polished walnut panels shining under recessed white lights, rows of black leather chairs filled with investors, retired military officers, federal observers, engineers in pressed shirts, and board members wearing suits that cost more than a working man's monthly rent. The air smelled of dark roast coffee, new carpet, rainwater drying on wool coats, warm, electronics, and the faint metallic breath of the server rooms behind the presentation wall. On the giant screen behind the stage, the words, "Liberty Corps, powering America when failure is not an option," glowed in blue and white above a digital animation of hospitals, military bases, and emergency shelters staying lit during a nationwide blackout. Then the animation froze. A red warning symbol appeared. Somewhere behind the wall, a relay snapped like a small bone breaking. Evelyn Carter, CEO of Patriot Grid Systems, stood at the center of the stage in a charcoal designer suit, one hand gripping a silver clicker, her dark hair perfectly smooth, her green eyes sharp enough to make grown men straighten their posture. She did not look frightened at first. She looked offended, as if the system had personally disrespected her. In the third row, a Pentagon procurement official leaned toward his aide. In the back, engineers began whispering into headsets. A senior vice president muttered, "Not now. Dear God, not now." And near the side service door, half hidden behind a rolling maintenance cart, Caleb Brooks stood with a damp navy blue work jacket clinging to his shoulders, boots darkened by rain, hands rough from years of tools, his visitor-style maintenance badge hanging crooked from his chest. He was not supposed to be part of the presentation. He was there to check why the auditorium's cooling units were vibrating near the control room. But when the warning tone changed from a software alert to a low, uneven pulse, Caleb's tired blue eyes lifted toward the ceiling panels. He heard something the others did not. A rhythm, a fault, a physical problem hiding under a digital panic. He stepped forward carefully and said, not loudly, "Ma'am, you need to shut down Module 3 before it kicks the backup rail." Evelyn turned toward him as if a stain on the floor had started speaking. Every face followed her gaze. Caleb swallowed, his jaw tight, his voice still respectful. "I've seen that pattern before on Navy emergency systems. It's not just code. It's heat drift and grounding interference. If you keep pushing..." Evelyn cut him off with one cold step forward. Her heels clicked against the stage floor. "Who are you?" she asked, although his badge was visible. Caleb glanced at the engineers staring at him, then back at her. "Caleb Brooks, Facilities Maintenance, ma'am." A small, cruel laugh escaped someone near the front. Evelyn's mouth tightened. The red warning light washed across her cheekbones. "Facilities Maintenance," she repeated, letting the words drop like something dirty. 100 engineers built this system, Mr. Brooks. Federal observers are watching. Investors are in this room. And you think the answer is coming from a man with a mop cart and a toolbox." Caleb's face flushed, but he did not move. He only looked toward the service corridor where his 9-year-old daughter, Lily, waited on a bench with her school backpack and a folded drawing of an American flag sticking out of the front pocket. Evelyn followed his glance, saw the child, then looked back at him without softening. "Get out of my auditorium," she said. "You're useless here." The words landed harder than the alarm. Caleb's shoulders lowered by half an inch, not in weakness, but in the practiced restraint of a father who could not afford to break in front of his daughter. For a second, the room did not breathe, and right there, before anyone knew how much those words would cost her, Evelyn Carter turned away from the only man in the building who understood the failure. If you're watching this story from somewhere across America or anywhere in the world, take a second to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. because what happened next proved that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the answer everyone else was too proud to see. Caleb did not answer Evelyn in front of the room because humiliation had become something he knew how to fold quietly and carry in his chest. He reached for the handle of his maintenance cart with one hand, the old leather of his tool bag creaking against the metal shelf, and for a moment the only movement in the auditorium came from the rain sliding down the tall windows behind the executives. He was 38 years old, but under the harsh corporate lights he looked older, with faint gray at his temples, a beard he had not had time to trim that morning, and the kind of exhaustion that does not come from one bad night, but from years of waking before dawn because a child's medicine schedule matters more than sleep. His jacket still carried the faded, stitched mark of his old Navy unit, the letters Brooks barely visible on a patch softened by time, salt air, and too many washes in apartment laundry rooms that smelled of detergent and quarters. Behind him, Lily stood up from the bench outside the open side door. She was small for 9, with a pale pink sweater under a denim jacket, brown curls tucked behind her ears, and a face too serious for a child. In her left hand, she held a crayon drawing she had made for Veterans Day at school, a flag, a hospital, and a stick figure man wearing a navy cap with the words, "My dad fixes things," written in uneven letters. She had been promised pancakes after the appointment if the cardiologist said her numbers looked steady. She had not expected to see a room full of important adults laugh at her father. Caleb saw her watching. That was the part that cut through him. Not Evelyn's voice, not the laughter, not the engineers looking away as if kindness might damage their careers. It was Lily's eyes searching his face for instructions on how a person survives being made small. Caleb forced a faint smile, the kind fathers use when the world is burning, but the child still needs breakfast. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly from the doorway, though everyone close enough could hear the tremor under the words. "Go sit back down." Lily did not sit. Her fingers tightened around the drawing until the paper bent. Evelyn, already turning back toward her executive team, caught that small gesture and felt something pass through her that she refused to name. The auditorium around her was a monument to achievement. Walnut glass, brushed steel, American flags, screens showing infrastructure maps, leather chairs filled with people who spoke in contract numbers and market forecasts. Yet the child in high. The corridor made all of it look strangely hollow. Evelyn looked at Caleb again and saw the soaked cuffs of his work pants, the scuffed boots, the careful posture of a man trying not to plead for dignity. For half a second, the memory of her own son Noah flashed in her mind at age 10, standing in the hallway of their Nashville home with a science fair ribbon in his hand, while she took a call from Washington and held up one finger to tell him to wait. He had waited. Then he had stopped waiting, over the years. Evelyn pressed that memory down where she kept all inconvenient emotions. "Daniel," she snapped to her chief technology officer. "Restore the demo." Daniel Price, a silver-haired MIT graduate with rimless glasses and a face drained of color, stared at 3 tablets at once. "We're trying, Evelyn. The diagnostic loop is contradicting itself. Core temperature reads normal, but current distribution is spiking. It makes no sense." Caleb stopped at the service threshold. He should have left. Every practical instinct told him to leave before someone decided the failure was his fault, simply because he was visible and poor enough to blame. But the pulsing tone behind the screen shifted again, uneven and ugly, and Caleb's stomach tightened with recognition. He had heard that sound years earlier in the belly of a destroyer during a storm in the Gulf, when a bad ground nearly cooked an emergency bus while officers argued over software diagnostics. Back then, shutting down the wrong panel could have left sailors in the dark. Here, if Liberty Corps shipped with this weakness, it would not be a presentation that failed. It could be a VA hospital in Virginia, a children's ward in Tennessee, an emergency shelter in Texas during a tornado outbreak. Caleb looked at Lily. She was still holding the drawing. He thought about her heart monitor beeping in the night. He thought about hospital lights. He thought about fathers sitting beside beds praying machines would not go dark. Slowly, against his own pride, he released the cart handle. The control room behind the auditorium was colder than the main hall, kept that way for the racks of equipment stacked behind glass panels. their tiny lights blinking green, amber, and now angry red in nervous patterns that reflected across the black floor tiles. The room smelled of hot dust, plastic insulation, ozone, and the lemon cleaner someone had used too heavily before the federal visitors arrived. Thick cables ran under raised flooring. A long table held laptops, thermal readouts, coffee cups gone untouched, and a half-eaten protein bar beside a notebook filled with equations. Engineers moved around the table like surgeons who had forgotten where the wound was. Some were brilliant. Some had designed parts of systems used by the military, airports, and disaster response agencies. But they were trapped inside the assumptions of their own model, staring at screens that insisted the physical world was behaving when every sound in the walls said it was not. Caleb stood outside the glass door, visible through the reflection of the American flag on the auditorium stage. He heard Daniel Price bark, "Cycle the diagnostic layer again." Another engineer answered, "Already did." A woman near the server rack whispered, "The backup rail is ghosting voltage." Someone else said, "That's impossible." Caleb muttered, almost to himself, "No, it's not." Lily had come closer now, stopping beside a framed photograph of Evelyn. Carter shaking hands with the senator beneath the caption, "Innovation in service of the nation." The girl's breathing was a little shallow from walking too quickly, and Caleb noticed immediately. He crouched in front of her, lowering himself until the corporate world vanished behind his shoulders. "Hey," he said, gently taking the bent drawing from her fingers and smoothing the corner with his thumb. "You okay?" Lily looked toward the room where Evelyn stood with her arms crossed. Why did she say that to you? Caleb's throat tightened. He had no good answer that would not make the world uglier. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared and use mean words," he said. Lily frowned. "But you're not useless." Caleb looked at her small face, at the trust there, at the way she believed a father's worth was something obvious and permanent. "No," he whispered. "I'm not." Behind him, the alarm jumped louder. A federal observer stepped into the hall and said to an aide, "If they can't stabilize it in 10 minutes, we recommend suspension of the contract." That sentence passed through the corridor like a cold draft. Evelyn heard it. Her board heard it. Caleb heard it too. For him, the number was not $480 million. It was not shareholder confidence or headlines or a lost bonus. It was the possibility that a system built to protect Americans might fail Americans because pride had blocked the simplest truth. He stood, kissed Lily's forehead, and handed her the drawing. "Stay right here. Don't move. Unless Ms. Janet from reception comes for you." Lily grabbed his sleeve. "Daddy, don't get yelled at again." Caleb looked through the glass at Evelyn, then back at his daughter. His voice dropped, steady now. "Sometimes doing the right thing means walking back into a room where people already decided you don't belong." He opened the control room door before fear could talk him out of it. Every engineer turned. Evelyn's face hardened instantly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, each syllable clipped. "I told you to leave." Caleb kept his hands visible, palms open, the old military habit still alive in him. "Yes, ma'am, and I will. But first, shut down Module 3 and pull the physical access panel behind Rack C. You've got a ground path heating under load. Your software says temperature is normal because the sensor is mounted 6 inches away from the actual fault." Daniel scoffed. "That architecture passed 8 months of simulation." Caleb looked at him, not angry, just tired. "Simulations. Don't smell insulation before it burns." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was not mockery. It was the first crack in certainty. Evelyn stepped closer to Caleb until only the corner of the steel table separated them, and under the bright ceiling lights, her face looked flawless in the way expensive things look flawless when they have never been allowed to be touched by weather. Caleb, by contrast, carried the weather with him. Rain at his collar, machine oil, in the lines of his hands, worry in the set of his mouth, and a father's tired patience in his eyes. "Do you understand what is happening here?" she asked quietly, more dangerous now than when she had shouted. "There are federal officials in that auditorium, retired admirals, investors, reporters waiting downstairs. This system is supposed to prove that Patriot Grid can protect American hospitals, bases, and emergency shelters when the grid fails. I do not have time for guesses. Caleb nodded. Once. Then don't guess. Check it. Daniel Price exhaled sharply. Evelyn, we are not opening a live module because a maintenance contractor has a feeling. Caleb turned toward him. It's not a feeling. It's a pattern. The alarm is cycling every 42 seconds because the load transfer is heating the bracket, expanding it just enough to touch a path it should never touch. Then it cools, separates, and repeats. That's why your data looks crazy. The fault is mechanical before it becomes electrical. One of the younger engineers, a woman with a ponytail and a Patriot Grid badge that read Maya Chen, looked up from her laptop. 42 seconds, she said, almost unwillingly. He's right about the interval. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her. Maya swallowed. The spikes are 41.8 to 42.3 seconds apart. The room shifted. Not much, but enough. Caleb saw it and did not take pleasure in it. He was not there to win a room. He was there because his daughter had once spent 3 nights in a pediatric cardiac unit where he listened to generators kick on during a storm, and he had promised himself that if he ever saw preventable failure near vulnerable people, he would not stay silent just to protect someone else's ego. Evelyn looked at the screens, then at the auditorium beyond the glass, then at Lily in the hallway, holding the little flag drawing against her chest. The CEO's jaw tightened. Her entire career had been built on control, on never letting a room see doubt, on crushing uncertainty before it made her look weak. But control was already gone. The system was failing in front of everyone. Her engineers were out of answers. The man she had humiliated was still standing there, offering one. Rain tapped against the windows, like fingers waiting for judgment. Finally, Evelyn said, "If we open that panel and you're wrong, I will have security walk you out myself." Caleb held her gaze. "If you don't open it, and I'm right, you won't need security. You'll need an apology to every hospital you plan to sell this to." Daniel whispered, "Evelyn." "No." But Evelyn raised one hand, stopping him. It was not humility yet, not transformation, not redemption. It was desperation wearing the mask of authority. "Maya," she said, voice low, "cut power to Module 3 under controlled procedure. Daniel, authorize physical access." Daniel stared at her as though she had betrayed the priesthood of credentials. "Now," Evelyn ordered. The room erupted into movement. Gloves were pulled on. A lockout tag was clipped. Maya entered commands with trembling fingers. Caleb stepped toward Rack C, not rushing, not showing off, simply moving with the calm precision of a man who had fixed critical systems while waves slammed steel walls around him and sailors prayed under red emergency lights. Outside the control room, Lily pressed her small hand against the glass. Evelyn saw it. Caleb saw it too, and as the access panel came loose with a metallic groan, a thin, bitter smell of overheated insulation slipped into the room, proving that the useless man had been listening to the truth all along. Caleb Brooks had learned, long before that cold morning at Patriot Grid Systems, that America often praised men like him in speeches while forgetting them in hallways. He had grown up 2 counties south of Huntsville, in a small Alabama house with a white porch, a rusted mailbox, and a flag his father raised every Memorial Day, even after the edges faded from weather. His father, Wayne Brooks, had been a diesel mechanic who believed a man's handshake should mean more than a contract, and his mother, Linda, taught Sunday school, packed lunches for neighbors after funerals, and kept a framed picture of Caleb in his Navy uniform beside a worn family Bible. Caleb had not been the smartest kid in class, not by the standards that won scholarships or made teachers call parents with shining predictions, but he had been the kind of boy who could take apart a broken radio at 12 and put it back together before supper. Machines made sense to him in a way people often did not. Wires had reasons, heat had causes, pressure left signs. People, on the other hand, could smile while judging your boots, thank you for your service while refusing to look you in the eye, or call you a hero on Veterans Day and maintenance on Wednesday. He joined the Navy at 19 because he wanted discipline, a trade, and a chance to serve something larger than himself. On ships, he learned emergency power systems the hard way, in engine rooms that smelled of fuel, hot metal, sweat, and salt, under red lights during drills. beside men who trusted each other because failure did not care about job titles. If a panel overheated at sea, nobody asked whether the sailor who heard it first had a master's degree. They asked whether he could keep the lights on. Caleb could. That simple truth had once given him pride. After leaving the service, though, pride did not pay medical bills, and the civilian world turned his years of practical knowledge into a line item that never looked as impressive as a university seal on a resume. He had married young, with more hope than money, and for a while he believed the life his parents taught him to want was coming together. A modest brick house outside Decatur, Sunday dinners, a truck he bought used for $9,800, and a little girl whose laugh made every unpaid bill feel survivable. Lily was born during a thunderstorm in March, 7 pounds even, with dark curls plastered to her head and blue eyes that opened as if she had been waiting to inspect the world. Caleb cried when he held her, not loudly, just one silent break in the face of a man who had stood steady through alarms and storms. Her mother, Rachel, had been warm at first, but worry changed her. Lily's heart condition was discovered before her first birthday, and the doctor's words turned the young family's kitchen into a place of quiet fear. There were appointments in Birmingham, prescriptions with names Caleb could not pronounce, insurance forms, late-night fevers, and small plastic bottles lined up beside the sink. Rachel began to feel trapped, then resentful, then distant. Caleb worked every shift he could find after leaving the Navy. Electrical repair, generator maintenance, overnight warehouse troubleshooting, even weekend appliance calls for cash. By the time Lily was 6, Rachel left a letter on the counter, saying she could not live inside fear anymore. She took 2 suitcases, withdrew $600 from their joint account, and moved to Arizona with a man Caleb had met only once. Lily asked for her mother every night for 3 months. Caleb never called Rachel cruel in front of the child. He simply said, "Some people get lost, sweetheart. We pray they find their way." But after Lily fell asleep, he would sit at the kitchen table under the yellow light, stare at bills spread across the wood, and press his thumb hard against his wedding ring until the skin underneath went white. Patriot Grid Systems came into his life not as a dream job, but as a lifeline. The contractor who hired him told Caleb the building needed someone who understood backup systems, chillers, server room power, and old-fashioned mechanical judgment. The pay was $22 an hour, sometimes $28 for emergency overnight work, and the health plan was thin but real enough to keep Lily's cardiology visits from becoming impossible. Caleb accepted before asking about pride. Pride had become a luxury, like steak dinners or vacations or new tires bought before the old ones were nearly bald. Every morning he woke at 4:45 in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of coffee, laundry soap, and the lavender lotion Lily liked on her hands before school. He packed her lunch in a faded red lunchbox, checked her medication, made sure her medical alert bracelet was clipped properly, and drove her to before-school care in his old Ford F-150, whose dashboard rattled whenever the road got rough. Lily would read spelling words from flashcards while Caleb listened, correcting gently. Then she would ask if he had a hard day coming. He always answered the same way, "Nothing we can't handle." The phrase became their family motto, written on a sticky note stuck to the refrigerator beside a drawing of the two of them under a big American flag. At Patriot Grid, Caleb moved through marble lobbies and executive floors like a ghost in work. Boots, fixing what broke after important people had already left the room. He knew which conference room thermostat lied by 3 degrees, which server rack hummed wrong before a fan failed, and which engineers treated him like a person when no manager was watching. He also knew where to stand when executives passed, so they would not have to step around him. Evelyn Carter, meanwhile, had spent her life becoming exactly the kind of person who would not notice Caleb until she needed someone beneath her to blame. Her father, Admiral Thomas Carter, had been a decorated Navy man, stern, disciplined, patriotic, and impossible to impress. Their house outside Norfolk had always smelled of polished wood, black coffee, shoe leather, and the lemon oil her mother used on the dining table before formal dinners. The American flag outside their home was replaced before it frayed, shoes were lined up by the door, beds were made with military corners, and emotions were handled privately or knotted. all. Evelyn learned early that achievement brought a nod from her father, while tears brought silence. When she won a debate tournament at 16, he said, "Good, now do it again under pressure." When she cried after a boyfriend humiliated her in college, he said, "Never give people the satisfaction of seeing where they hit you." Those lessons made her formidable. They also made her lonely. By 44, she had a net worth of more than $70 million, a corner office with a view of half the city, a townhouse in Nashville she rarely visited, and a son who answered her texts with one-word replies. Her ex-husband, Mark, once told her during their final argument, "You don't lead a family, Evelyn. You brief it, schedule it, and correct it." She signed the divorce papers without crying. Then she returned to work and closed a federal contract worth more than some towns' annual budgets. The company she built carried her father's language everywhere: duty, resilience, service, America first, when it mattered most. Patriot Grid's commercials showed nurses smiling under emergency lights, National Guard trucks rolling through floodwater, children safe in school gyms during hurricanes, and elderly veterans in hospital beds while backup power kept monitors alive. Evelyn believed in that mission, at least intellectually. She told senators and investors that reliable power was not a luxury, but a promise a serious nation made to its people. Yet inside her own building, she allowed a culture where rank swallowed character. Engineers mocked field technicians. Executives spoke of human capital with smooth voices and dead eyes. Contractors wore different badge colors so everyone knew who belonged and who could be replaced. Evelyn did not create every cruelty, but she rewarded the speed and arrogance that allowed cruelty to thrive. She told herself softness would weaken the company. She told herself compassion was acceptable only after performance. She told herself her father would understand. But in the control room, as Caleb's warning proved correct and the smell of overheated insulation spread beneath the cold server air, the story she had told herself began to split. The man she had dismissed had not walked away. He had come back because the system mattered more than his pride. That disturbed her more deeply than open defiance would have. When the access panel finally came free behind Rack C, the evidence was not dramatic enough for television, but devastating enough for anyone who understood machines. A copper contact near the load transfer assembly showed a faint discoloration, a bruise-like darkening where repeated heat had stressed the metal. A grounding braid had been installed at an angle that looked acceptable in diagrams, but shifted under vibration. The thermal sensor, mounted cleanly according to spec, sat just far enough from the true hotspot to tell a comforting lie. Caleb crouched in front of it with a flashlight between his teeth, his knees, pressing into the hard raised floor, and pointed without touching. "There," he said. "That bracket expands under load. It kisses the path, spikes, cools, breaks contact, then does it all over again. That's your ghost." Maya Chen leaned beside him, her face pale with concentration. How did we miss that? Caleb removed the flashlight and looked at the assembly, not at the people. "Because on paper it's fine." Daniel Price snapped, "That is not an answer." Caleb finally looked up. "It is if." Everyone only trusted the paper. The words were not loud, but they found every guilty person in the room. Evelyn stood behind them with her arms lowered now, no longer crossed. Her phone buzzed again and again with messages from board members, legal counsel, investor relations, and a senator's office, but she did not check it. She watched Caleb ask for a ceramic spacer, 2 insulated clamps, a torque driver, and a temporary reroute of the braid. No drama, no revenge, no speech, just work. Why, gosh. Hands moved with careful confidence, scarred fingers steady, each motion shaped by years of being the person called after something expensive stopped obeying theory. For the next 20 minutes, the control room became a battlefield without shouting, and Caleb became the quiet center of it. He asked Maya to monitor the current spike interval. He asked another engineer to confirm lockout status before he reached inside the panel. He told Daniel to stop cycling diagnostics because the repeated load shifts were worsening the heat pattern. Daniel resisted until Evelyn said, "Do what he says." That sentence landed almost as heavily as her earlier insult. Caleb did not look back at her. He did not need permission to know the truth of the machine. But he needed authority to stop proud people from making it worse. Outside the glass, Lily sat with Janet from reception, who had brought her a paper cup of water and a packet of crackers from her purse. Lily's small face remained turned toward her father. Every so often, Caleb glanced over just long enough to check her color. When he saw her press a hand to her chest after coughing, his expression changed so quickly, Evelyn almost missed it. The mechanic vanished, and the father appeared, frightened but controlled. "She all right?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. Caleb tightened a clamp. "She has a cardiology appointment at 2. Why is she here?" Daniel muttered, as if a child in the building were another inconvenience. Caleb's jaw flexed. "School called. She had chest tightness after gym. I was trying to finish my shift and take her in." Evelyn looked toward Lily again. The girl's shoes were clean but worn at the toes. Her backpack had a heart-shaped patch sewn over a tear. On the bench beside her lay the folded drawing. Something inside Evelyn recoiled at the thought that while she was preparing to speak about protecting American families, one of those families had been sitting in her hallway, afraid to ask, for time. The repair worked in stages, the way truth often does. First, the warning tone stretched farther apart. Then, one of the red alerts faded to amber. Maya whispered, "Current distribution is stabilizing." Daniel frowned as if the screen had betrayed him personally. Caleb asked for another load test, smaller this time, with cooling held steady and diagnostics passive. No one laughed now. The engineers who had smirked at his boots leaned closer. A retired Air Force colonel from the Federal Psych Observer Group entered the control room and watched in silence, his eyes moving from Caleb's old Navy patch to the exposed module. "You prior service?" he asked. Caleb kept working. "Yes, sir. Navy Electrical Systems Technician. 8 years. The colonel nodded once with a respect that did not need decoration. "Thought so." Evelyn heard that too. She remembered her father saying that real competence often had grease under its nails. She had forgotten because polished rooms rewarded polish. When the module finally held under controlled load for 5 straight minutes, the entire room seemed to exhale. Maya let out a shaky laugh and covered her mouth. Another engineer said, "He did it." Caleb corrected him immediately. "Temporary stabilization, not a full fix. You'll need a redesign on the bracket clearance and sensor placement before deployment." That mattered. He could have taken the applause and left the danger hidden, but he did not. His honesty threatened the launch, the contract, the stock price, and the careers of the people around him. It also protected every hospital, base, and shelter that might one day depend on Liberty Corps. Evelyn felt the sharp edge of shame move deeper. She had built a company to serve the country, then nearly punished the only man in the room who took service seriously enough to tell the truth when lying would have been easier. Still, transformation did not happen cleanly, and the world outside the control room remained hungry for a scapegoat. The board chair, Richard Voss, arrived with 2 legal advisors and a face reddened by panic. He was 61, rich in the heavy way some men become rich by never carrying anything heavier than blame. With silver cufflinks, a navy suit, and a voice trained to sound patriotic at fundraisers. "Evelyn," he said sharply, pulling her aside near the glass wall, "we need to contain this. The demo can continue if we frame it as a live stress test anomaly. Do not let that contractor speak to anyone. We cannot have a facilities worker implying design negligence in front of federal procurement." Evelyn's eyes moved to Caleb, who was packing his tools while still answering Maya's questions. "He found the fault," she said. Richard lowered his voice. "Then thank him privately and terminate the contract quietly after this week. Pay him something. Make him sign an NDA. We protect the company first." Those words would have made sense to Evelyn 2 hours earlier. They were the language of survival. Liability, optics, and power. But now, through the glass, she could see Lily slipping off the bench because Caleb had gestured that he was almost done. The little girl walked carefully, one hand near her chest, trying not to look scared. Caleb's whole body softened when she approached. He knelt, zipped his tool bag with one hand, and touched her cheek with the other. Evelyn could not hear what they said, but she could read the tenderness in the pause between them. Richard kept talking. "Federal. Contracts are war, Evelyn. You know that. Don't get sentimental because some blue-collar dad had a lucky guess." Evelyn turned back to him slowly. It wasn't a lucky guess. Richard's smile thinned. Don't be naive. The insult was subtle, but Evelyn heard her father in reverse. Weakness, emotion, softness, danger. For the first time, she wondered whether the thing she had called strength had simply been fear with better posture. Caleb did not know about the argument happening beside the glass. He was focused on Lily, who insisted she was fine even though her lips looked a shade too pale. You always say that when you're not, he murmured. Lily tried to smile. You fixed the big machine. For now. Does that mean the lady won't be mad anymore? Caleb looked over Lily's head and saw Evelyn watching them. His instinct was to protect his daughter from hoping for fairness. It means we did what we came to do, he said. Now we're going to your appointment. Lily held up the wrinkled drawing. I wanted to give this to you after, but everyone saw. Caleb took it carefully, as if it were a military commendation. This is better than any medal I ever got. Lily's eyes watered. She called you useless. Caleb looked at the flag drawn in crayon, at the little hospital with yellow windows, at the stick-figure dad standing beside it with oversized hands. He could not lie completely. She was wrong. Lily nodded, needing to hear that. Are you going to tell her? Caleb smiled sadly. Sometimes people have to figure out they're wrong before they can hear it from someone else. Evelyn heard the last sentence as she approached. It stopped her a few feet away. Up close, Lily looked even smaller, and Caleb looked more tired than he had in the control room. The CEO suddenly noticed details she had ignored before. The frayed seam at his cuff, the careful way he held the girl's backpack and tool bag on the same shoulder, the hospital paperwork folded in his jacket pocket, the wedding ring still worn on a chain beneath his shirt, though there was no wife beside him. Evelyn opened her mouth with the intention of saying something controlled, something executive, something that would preserve hierarchy while acknowledging usefulness. But Lily looked directly at her and asked, Do you say sorry when you hurt people? The question was not rude. It was worse. It was innocent. Evelyn Carter had faced Senate committees, hostile investors, union threats, cyber attack briefings, and acquisition negotiations where one wrong sentence could cost millions. But she had never felt as exposed as she did under the gaze of a sick child holding a crayon flag. She looked at Caleb first, because apologizing to him in front of Lily would require her to become smaller than her title, and some old trained part of her still fought against it. Caleb did not rescue her from the moment. He simply stood there quiet, with dignity she had not granted him. Yes, Evelyn said at last, her voice lower than before. People should say sorry when they hurt people. Lily waited. Evelyn's throat tightened. Mr. Brooks, what I said in the auditorium was wrong. The words came out stiff, but real. I was under pressure, and I used that pressure as an excuse to humiliate you. You were not useless. You were the only person who understood the failure clearly enough to stop it. Caleb's eyes did not soften immediately. Pain does not disappear, because the person who caused it finally names it. Thank you, he said, formal and guarded. Evelyn looked at Lily. And I'm sorry you had to hear me say that about your father. Lily studied her with the seriousness of a child who had spent too much time in hospitals learning which adults meant what they said. He fixes everything, she said. Evelyn nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. Behind them, the auditorium staff began resetting screens, and applause rose faintly from the far room as someone announced the system had stabilized. Evelyn should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the uncomfortable beginning of responsibility. Caleb checked his watch and shifted the tool bag higher on his shoulder. Ma'am, if there's nothing else, I need to take her to Huntsville Hospital. Evelyn glanced at the clock. It was already 1:17 p.m. The appointment was at 2. Rain was still hitting the windows hard enough to slow traffic. I'll have a car take you, she said. Caleb shook his head. That's not necessary. It is, Evelyn replied, then caught herself. Her voice softened. Please, let me do that much. Caleb wanted to refuse because pride, once bruised, often mistakes help for another kind of insult. But Lily leaned against his side, tired now, and he looked down at her. All right, he said, for her. The ride to Huntsville Hospital should have been simple, but even there, the difference between Evelyn's world and Caleb's life sat between them like another passenger. Evelyn's black company SUV smelled of Yao Shao, leather, rain, an expensive air freshener. Caleb sat in the back beside Lily because she hated riding alone when her chest felt tight. He buckled her in, checked the small medication pouch in her backpack, and rubbed warmth into her fingers. Evelyn sat in the front passenger seat after surprising even herself by choosing to go along instead of sending a driver with them. No one had asked her to come. In fact, Richard Voss had warned her in a text that disappearing during a federal recovery briefing would look emotionally erratic. She ignored it. Through the rain-streaked windows, Huntsville moved past in gray and silver. Strip malls with American flags snapping in the wind. A Chick-fil-A drive-thru wrapped around the building. A church sign reading, "Courage is faith in work boots." Pickup trucks throwing water from their tires. And office parks where people were still having ordinary afternoons, while Evelyn's understanding of leadership quietly came apart. Lily leaned against Caleb and whispered, "Are rich cars always this quiet?" Caleb gave her a look. "Lily." Evelyn almost smiled. "This one is." Lily touched the stitching on the seat. "Our truck makes a sound like a duck when Daddy turns left." Caleb closed his eyes briefly, embarrassed. Evelyn looked out the windshield, but her reflection in the glass had changed. She thought of Noah again, of all the times he had tried to make small jokes from the back seat while she answered emails. She could not remember the last time she had laughed with him without checking a phone. At the hospital entrance, Caleb thanked the driver, lifted Lily into his arms even though she protested that she could walk, and hurried through the automatic doors into a lobby smelling of antiseptic, wet coats, coffee, and worry. Evelyn followed 2 steps behind, suddenly out of place without a podium, title, or room full of people waiting for her command. In the pediatric cardiology waiting area, the chairs were vinyl, the walls painted with faded murals of hot air balloons, and a television in the corner played a daytime talk show no one was really watching. Families sat in scattered clusters, a mother filling out forms with a baby asleep against her chest, a grandfather in a Vietnam veteran cap holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee, a teenage boy scrolling on his phone while his father rubbed the back of his neck in silence. Caleb checked Lily in at the desk and asked, with the careful politeness of someone used to fighting bureaucracy without sounding angry, whether the insurance authorization had cleared. The receptionist frowned at the screen. "It's still pending secondary review." Caleb's shoulders tensed. "They told me Friday it was approved." "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. It says here they need employment verification again because your coverage is through a subcontractor." Lily looked up at him. "Daddy?" Caleb forced calm into his face. "It's okay." But Evelyn saw the small crack. She saw him step aside, take out a folder soft from being opened too many times, and produce pay stubs, benefit letters, a contractor ID copy, and a handwritten note with claim numbers. This was not one problem. This was his life, proving over and over that his daughter deserved care, that his job counted, that his insurance was real, that his service mattered, that he was not trying to get something for free. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest, not anger at him, but at the machinery of indifference she had never had to navigate personally. She approached the desk. Caleb shook his head slightly, warning her not to turn his daughter's medical care into a spectacle. Evelyn understood and lowered her voice. "I'm his employer's executive sponsor," she said, choosing the closest true phrase. "What document do you need to verify active status today?" The receptionist blinked, suddenly aware of the quality of Evelyn's suit and the authority in her tone. "Usually HR confirmation." Evelyn took out her phone, called Patriot Grid's benefits director directly, and said, "You will verify Caleb Brooks's active contractor coverage with this clinic now. Stay on the line until it is done." Caleb looked at her, pride and gratitude wrestling painfully across his face. "You don't have to do that." Evelyn met his eyes. "I should have done a lot of things before today." The appointment revealed no emergency, but it revealed enough to deepen the bond none of them had planned. Dr. Amelia Reeves, a calm woman with silver blonde hair and reading glasses on a chain, listened to Lily's heart, reviewed the monitor data, and explained that stress and exertion had likely triggered the chest tightness, but that Lily's medication schedule and follow-up tests needed to remain consistent. Caleb listened with the focus of a soldier receiving mission instructions, asking exact questions, writing notes in a small notebook already filled with dates. dosages, and reminders. Lily sat on the exam table, swinging her feet slightly, her little sneakers not quite touching the step. Evelyn stood near the wall, intending to remain invisible, but Lily kept glancing at her. "Are you Daddy's boss now?" the child asked suddenly. Caleb said, "Sweetheart," Evelyn answered before he could smooth it over. "Not exactly, but I should have been responsible for how people treated him at work." Lily considered that. At school, if someone is mean, Mrs. Parker says being a leader means you stop it. Dr. Reeves pretended to review the chart, but Caleb looked down, fighting the emotion that rose in him whenever Lily spoke simple truths adults made complicated. Evelyn absorbed the sentence like a verdict. Being a leader means you stop it, not excuse it, not outsource it, not brand around it. Stop it. After the appointment, as Caleb helped Lily into her jacket, Dr. Reeves pulled him aside and mentioned a specialist in Birmingham with newer treatment options, but warned that the travel, time off, and additional testing could be difficult. Caleb nodded the way poor parents nod when hearing about help that sits behind money, scheduling, and permission. Evelyn watched him fold the referral sheet carefully, not with hope, but with calculation. Gas, work hours, co-pays, school absence, lost overtime. She had approved executive retreats that cost $240,000 without reading meal details. Caleb was silently deciding whether his daughter's care could fit inside the margins of a life that had no margins left. That evening, after Lily was safely home with Mrs. Alvarez, their widowed neighbor who smelled of flour tortillas and rose soap and treated the girl like family, Caleb returned to Patriot Grid because the temporary stabilization still needed documentation. Evelyn found him in the nearly empty control room at 9:38 p.m., sleeves rolled up, writing notes by hand while the cleaning crew moved quietly through the executive floor. The building felt different at night. Without the crowd, its luxury seemed colder. Dark glass reflecting empty hallways, leather chairs pushed in with military precision, flags motionless, screens dimmed to blue standby light. Caleb had every reason to leave the company with resentment, but he was creating a clear failure report, so the next technician, engineer, or inspector would not have to guess. Evelyn stood in the doorway for several seconds before he noticed. "You should be home," she said. Caleb did not look up. "So should you." It was not disrespectful. It was true. She stepped inside. "How is Lily?" "Resting." "And you?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I don't usually make the chart." Evelyn accepted that. The silence between them stretched, filled by the hum of equipment and the distant thump of a mop bucket in the hall. Finally, she said, "I found your reports." Caleb's pen stopped. "Which ones?" "All three. The grounding concern, the vibration concern, the sensor placement concern." Caleb looked up then, and the exhaustion in his eyes sharpened into something more dangerous than anger. Confirmation. "I sent them because I didn't want today to happen." Evelyn nodded. "They were dismissed at department level. Because they came from me." She did not insult him by denying it. "Yes." Caleb leaned back, rubbing both hands over his face. "Do you know what the worst part is? I'm used to being ignored. I'm used to being the guy people call when water leaks through a ceiling, but don't want speaking in meetings. But this thing," he tapped the report, "this thing is supposed to keep people alive. Veterans, kids, old folks in storm shelters. I thought maybe that would matter more than the badge color." Evelyn sat across from him without asking permission, her posture still formal but her face stripped of its stage hardness. It should have. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, but it didn't. She lowered her eyes first. The conversation that followed did not heal everything, because real wounds do not close. Just because powerful people feel bad for a night, but it opened a door. Evelyn told Caleb about her father, not the public legend, but the private man who measured love in discipline and made praise feel like a medal locked behind glass. She told him about Noah, though she almost stopped twice because saying her son's name in that room made her feel less like a CEO and more like a mother who had failed an inspection no board could grade. "He used to wait up for me," she said, fingers resting around a paper coffee cup gone cold. "When he was little, he would fall asleep on the stairs with a book in his lap. I'd step over him because I had calls with DC or Tokyo or investors in California. I told myself I was building something for him." Caleb listened without softening too quickly. Were you? Evelyn's mouth tightened. I don't know anymore. He nodded, not with judgment, but with the weary recognition of a parent who understood sacrifice could become an excuse if left unexamined. Kids don't remember the contract you closed, he said quietly. They remember whether you looked at them when they walked into the room. The sentence hit her harder than he intended. She looked away toward the dark auditorium where, that morning, she had chosen reputation over dignity and nearly lost both. Caleb stood and gathered his papers. I'm not your priest, Ms. Carter. I can't absolve you. Evelyn looked back at him. I'm not asking you to. Good, he said, because what you do next matters more than what you feel tonight. He slid the handwritten report across the table. Start with the bracket redesign. Then start with the people who knew something was wrong and were afraid to speak, because this place taught them silence was safer. Evelyn picked up the report. For the first time in years, a document in her hand felt less like a tool of control and more like a mirror. By the next morning, Patriot Grid Systems no longer felt like a company preparing for a product launch. It felt like a courthouse where every hallway carried evidence and every polished surface reflected guilt. Rain had stopped, but the city outside remained damp and gray, with low clouds pressing over Huntsville and thin sunlight catching on puddles in the parking lot. Evelyn arrived before 6, wearing the same charcoal suit from the day before, because she had never gone home long enough to change. And for the first time in years, the lobby security guards saw their CEO walk in without her usual armor of speed and command. She carried Caleb's handwritten report in one hand and the 3 ignored maintenance warnings in the other. By 7:30, she had called an emergency review in the main auditorium, the same room where she had humiliated him. But this time, the stage looked different. The giant Liberty Corps screen had been replaced by live engineering diagrams, failure photos, thermal data, and a plain white slide titled, What We Missed. Board members filled the front row with stiff faces. The engineering division sat together, uneasy and defensive. Federal observers returned with colder expressions than before. Richard Voss stood near the aisle, whispering into the ear of legal counsel, already calculating how to bury blame without burying profit. Caleb arrived through the side entrance with Maya Chen, not in a suit, not polished for performance, but in a clean navy work shirt, his old navy jacket folded over one arm, and a new exhaustion under his eyes from sleeping only. 3 hours in a chair beside Lily's bed. He had not wanted to come. He had told Evelyn over the phone that morning, I gave you the report. That's enough. Evelyn had answered, No, Mr. Brooks, it isn't. They ignored you in private. They will hear you in public. When he stepped into the auditorium, conversations thinned until only the hum of lights remained. He glanced instinctively toward the corridor, but Lily was not there. Mrs. Alvarez had taken her to school with a note excusing her from gym. Caleb looked relieved and strangely alone without her small presence anchoring him. Evelyn saw that and understood something she had missed the day before. Courage did not mean Caleb was unafraid of rooms like this. Courage meant he walked into them anyway, because truth had work to do. Evelyn opened the meeting without music, branding, or corporate language, and that alone unsettled everyone who knew her. She stood at the edge of the stage, not behind the podium, with the American flag her right and the Liberty Corps module photo behind her, enlarged so every discoloration and misplaced sensor could be seen. Yesterday, she began, her voice steady but stripped of its old sharpness. I failed as a leader before this system failed as a product. The room shifted. Richard Voss's head snapped up. Daniel Price stared at the floor. Caleb remained near the side aisle, arms relaxed but jaw set, as if ready for the room to turn against him again. Evelyn continued, We built a system meant to protect American families during disasters, veterans in hospitals, children on monitors, parents in storm shelters. We wrapped that mission in patriotic language, and then inside this building, we ignored the kind of American worker who keeps real systems alive when theory meets heat, vibration, rain, and time. She lifted the first report. Caleb Brooks warned us about grounding interference 6 weeks ago. She lifted the second. He warned us about vibration under load 4 weeks ago. She lifted the third. He warned us about sensor placement 11 days ago. She turned toward Daniel, but did not attack him with cruelty. She simply refused to hide him from responsibility. Those warnings were dismissed because of his badge color, his job title, and our arrogance. Daniel's face reddened. A board member muttered, "This is not the appropriate venue." Evelyn looked at him. "It became the appropriate venue when we made humiliation public and accountability private." A silence followed, heavy and clean. Caleb's eyes lowered for a moment, not because he was ashamed, but because hearing the truth spoken aloud after years of swallowing it felt almost unbearable. Evelyn turned fully toward him. "Mr. Brooks, yesterday I called you useless in front of this room. I was wrong. I was cruel. I confused authority with wisdom, and I used my position to make a good man feel small in front of his child." Her voice caught slightly on the last word, and everyone heard it. I'm sorry." Caleb did not answer immediately. The entire auditorium seemed to wait on his forgiveness, as if it were another system command. He looked at the flag, then at the engineers, then at Evelyn. "I accept the apology," he said quietly, "but don't make this about my feelings. Fix the process that lets people get ignored until something catches fire." Richard Voss rose before Evelyn could respond, his chair scraping sharply across the floor. "This has gone far enough," he said, forcing a smile toward the federal observers. "We appreciate Mr. Brooks's contribution, of course, but we need to be careful not to dramatize a correctable technical anomaly into an indictment of the company." Caleb's expression did not change, but Evelyn saw several engineers shrink back into their seats. There it was, the old culture, still alive, still teaching silence. Richard turned toward Caleb with polished condescension. "Mr. Brooks, you are clearly a capable technician. No one disputes that, but there are legal, contractual, and reputational complexities here that are above your pay grade." Caleb looked at him for a long second. "Sir, electricity doesn't care about my pay grade." A few people drew in breath. Richard's smile disappeared. "That kind of attitude is exactly why technical labor needs executive oversight." Evelyn stepped down from the stage. "Enough." Richard turned on her. "Evelyn, if you continue this public confession, you expose us to federal penalties, shareholder action, and press damage. We can still control the narrative." Evelyn walked to the front row, close enough that she no longer needed the microphone. "That's the problem, Richard. We keep trying to control the narrative instead of telling the truth." He lowered his voice. "Your father would be ashamed to see you hand this company to a maintenance man because he made you emotional." The room froze. Evelyn's face went pale, and for a moment Caleb saw the daughter beneath the CEO, the woman still, being commanded by a dead admiral's imagined judgment. Then Evelyn straightened, not hardening this time, but freeing herself. "My father served this country," she said, each word clear. "And if he taught me anything worth keeping, it's that rank exists to protect the mission, not the ego of the officer wearing it." She turned toward the federal observers. "We will suspend deployment until the bracket assembly and sensor placement are redesigned, retested, and independently verified. We will submit the complete failure history, including ignored warnings. And Mr. Brooks will lead the field reliability review because he is the person who identified the real-world failure." Richard barked a humorless laugh. "You can't put a contractor in charge of engineers." Evelyn looked at Caleb. "I can put competence in charge of pride." The greatest shock came not when Caleb fixed the machine again, but when the machine failed a second time under conditions designed to prove him wrong. Daniel, still wounded by public exposure, proposed a full load demonstration after the temporary modification, insisting that the system would hold and that the original design flaw had been overstated. Federal observers agreed to witness one controlled test before deciding whether to freeze the contract entirely. Caleb objected. "Not at full load with that temporary spacer. You'll create lateral stress near the backup rail." Daniel replied, "We're following engineering protocol." Caleb's voice stayed calm. "Your protocol is behind the failure." Evelyn looked at Maya, who looked frightened but nodded in support of Caleb. Richard whispered, "Let the engineers run their test." For one dangerous minute, Evelyn hesitated between the old world and the new one she had just promised to build. Then the load test began, and the auditorium watched the live data climb. 10%, 25, 40. The temporary fix held. Daniel's confidence returned visibly. At 65%, a faint vibration entered the room through the floor. Caleb heard it first, and his head turned toward the control wall. At 72%, the amber warning appeared. Daniel said, "Sensor artifact." Caleb moved. "Kill the load." Daniel snapped, "Do not touch that panel." Evelyn looked at the numbers, and then at Caleb's face, where fear had sharpened into certainty. This time she did not wait for the room to approve her humility. "Maya, kill the load," she ordered. But the command lagged. A backup transfer. Sequence initiated automatically, and the system began chasing stability in the exact way Caleb had warned against. Caleb crossed the floor fast, not recklessly, but with trained urgency, reached the manual isolation panel and shouted, "Confirm lockout path B!" Maya yelled back, "Confirmed!" Daniel shouted something about liability, but Caleb had already opened the manual cover. The auditorium screen flashed red, the air filled with a hot electrical smell. For 3 seconds, every expensive title in the room became meaningless. Caleb's hands moved through the sequence he had learned in shipboard emergencies, isolating the load before the fault could cascade into the backup rail. The warning tone peaked, then dropped. The red lights blinked to amber, then white. The main screen stabilized with the words, "Manual isolation successful." Caleb stood there breathing hard, one hand braced against the panel, sweat visible at his temple. No one clapped. They were too stunned by how close they had come to proving him right through disaster. Evelyn walked to him slowly. "You just saved the system again," she said. Caleb shook his head, anger finally breaking through the exhaustion. "No, I saved the people this system is supposed to serve from our stubbornness. There's a difference." That sentence became the emotional center of the room, and Evelyn knew the old version of her life had ended. She faced the employees, board members, federal observers, and engineers who had watched Caleb be mocked, ignored, challenged, and proven right twice. "Listen to me," she said, her voice no longer polished for investors but grounded in something stronger. "From this moment forward, Patriot Grid Systems will not measure human worth by badge color, degree, salary, accent, uniform, or office floor. We build for America, and America is not built only by people in corner offices. It is built by fathers who show up tired, veterans who carry knowledge in scarred hands, technicians who hear danger before dashboards admit it, mothers working double shifts, engineers humble enough to listen, families who need the lights to stay on when storms come." Caleb looked away because the words were too close to the parts of him he kept guarded. Evelyn stepped closer and lowered her voice so only the first rose, and Caleb could hear clearly. "You told me last night that what I do next matters more than what I feel. You were right." She turned to the federal observers. "Deployment remains suspended until Mr. Brooks signs off on field reliability." Daniel stood abruptly. "You're giving him veto authority?" Evelyn did not flinch. "I'm giving the mission a conscience." Caleb looked at her then, stunned not by the title but by the trust. "Ms. Carter, I don't want revenge. I don't want anyone destroyed." Evelyn nodded. "Then help me build something better." He looked toward the empty corridor where Lily had stood the day before, and his voice dropped. "I'll help if the people who speak up after me don't have to bleed first." Evelyn's eyes filled, but she did not hide it. "That's a promise." For the first time, Caleb extended his hand to her not as a subordinate asking for permission, but as a man accepting responsibility. Evelyn shook it with both hands. In the back row, the retired Air Force colonel stood first, then Maya, then one engineer after another, until the auditorium rose in a quiet standing ovation that felt less like celebration and more like repentance. Caleb did not smile broadly. He simply bowed his head, because all he could think about was telling Lily that this time, the room had listened. If this story of a humble single dad proving everyone wrong has you watching until the end, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more emotional stories of sacrifice, hidden strength, and unforgettable twists. Now let's get back to the video. 3 months after the failed Liberty Corps demonstration, Patriot Grid Systems no longer looked like the same company from the inside, even though the glass walls, marble floors, and American flags remained in place. The difference was in the way people moved through the building. Contractors no longer lowered their eyes when executives passed. Engineers began walking down to the field testing bays instead of waiting for reports to climb through layers of pride. A new sign stood outside the reliability lab on the 6th floor. Not glossy or decorative, but brushed steel with bold, dark letters. Hands that built America. Field Reliability Division. Beneath it, smaller words read, "Experience is evidence." Caleb Brooks stood under that sign on its opening morning, wearing a Navy suit Evelyn had insisted was not charity, but a uniform for the next chapter of his life, though he kept his old Navy jacket hanging on the back of his office chair because he never wanted to forget where his knowledge had come from. His new title was Director of Field Reliability, with a salary of $145,000 a year, full benefits, paid medical leave for Lily's appointments, and authority to stop any deployment that failed real-world testing. His team was unlike anything Patriot Grid had ever built. Former Navy electricians, retired Air Force generator specialists, single parents who had worked industrial maintenance nights, young engineers from state colleges, older technicians who had been passed over for years because they lacked polished language, and Maya Chen, who had requested transfer from advanced systems engineering because, as she told Caleb, "I want to learn how machines behave when they leave the PowerPoint." On the wall behind Caleb's desk was Lily's crayon drawing, now framed beside a small American flag and a photograph of Caleb's old Navy crew. Evelyn had asked if he wanted a corporate award displayed there too. Caleb had smiled and said, "Maybe later. Right now, that drawing tells the truth better." The Liberty Corps redesign was slower, more expensive, and far more honest than the original launch. The bracket assembly was rebuilt, the sensors were relocated, field vibration tests were expanded from 40 hours to 400, and every technician's warning now entered the same review system as engineering data. The federal contract was not only saved, but strengthened after Patriot Grid disclosed the failure fully and demonstrated the redesign at a VA hospital simulation in Birmingham, where backup power held steady. Through brutal stress conditions, when the green light stayed on, the room applauded. But Caleb looked first toward Lily, who sat in the front row with a small scar visible near her collar from a recent procedure, and a proud smile that made every insult he had endured feel smaller than the future she still had. Evelyn's transformation was quieter, and because it was quieter, it lasted. She stopped using patriotism as a slogan and began treating it as a responsibility that started with the people nearest to her. She moved out of the empty executive apartment she had kept near headquarters and began spending weekends in Nashville with Noah, not as a visiting authority figure, but as a mother willing to be awkward, late, apologetic, and present. The first time she attended one of his robotics competitions without taking a single call, Noah kept glancing at her from across the gym as if testing whether she would disappear into her phone. She did not. When his team's small robot failed, halfway through the course, Evelyn watched him kneel beside it with a screwdriver and a frustrated expression that reminded her painfully of Caleb in the control room. Her first instinct was to offer advice. Instead, she sat still and let him solve it. Afterward, in the parking lot under a pale Tennessee sunset, Noah said, "You actually watched the whole thing." Evelyn nodded, shame and gratitude pressing against her ribs. "I did." He kicked a pebble near the curb. "Why now?" She could have given him a polished speech about priorities, leadership, or second chances. But Caleb's voice had taught her that truth needed fewer decorations. "Because I was wrong about what mattered," she said. Noah looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged in the careful way teenagers protect hope. "There's another meet next month." Evelyn's eyes burned. "I'll be there." At Patriot Grid, she also changed how executives were evaluated. No leader received a bonus unless anonymous worker safety reports were addressed. Field staff had direct access to review boards, and every major launch included technicians in the room before decisions were final. Richard Voss resigned after the board refused to support his plan to remove Evelyn. and Daniel Price remained only after issuing a formal apology to Caleb and accepting a 6-month rotation under field reliability. Caleb did not enjoy seeing proud men humbled, but he believed in accountability when it led to repair. One evening, after a long redesign meeting, Daniel stopped beside his desk and said stiffly, "I thought credentials made me careful." Caleb looked up. "No, humility makes you careful. Credentials just tell people where you studied." Daniel absorbed that, nodded once, and for the first time, did not argue. For Caleb and Lily, the change did not turn life into a fairy tale, but it gave them something better. Breathing room, dignity, and a future that no longer felt like it had to be negotiated one overdue bill at a time. They moved from the cramped apartment into a small brick house on a quiet street in Madison, Alabama, with a maple tree in the front yard, a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, and a bedroom Lily painted soft yellow because she said hospitals had enough white walls. Caleb paid off $18,600 in medical debt the first month he could, replaced the rattling Ford with a safer used Chevrolet Tahoe, and set up a college fund with the first bonus he ever received in his life. Mrs. Alvarez came with them for Sunday dinner every week, bringing homemade tortillas and insisting the new kitchen needed more warmth. Evelyn came once too, invited by Lily after the girl declared that people who say sorry and mean it should get pie. Caleb laughed when he heard it, but he let the invitation stand. That Sunday, the house smelled of roast chicken, cinnamon apples, coffee, and furniture polish. A folded flag sat in a shadow box above the mantel, beside a photograph of Caleb's parents. Lily helped set the table, carefully placing napkins beside plates from a discount store Caleb had bought years earlier and refused to replace because they had survived the hardest season with them. Evelyn arrived with Noah, both slightly nervous, carrying flowers and a pecan pie from a bakery in downtown Huntsville. The dinner was not dramatic. No one made speeches. That was what made it healing. Noah and Lily talked about robots and science fairs. Mrs. Alvarez told Evelyn she was too skinny and put more potatoes on her plate. Caleb bowed his head before the meal and prayed simply for family, for work done honestly, for the country they loved, and for the wisdom to never confuse wealth with worth. Evelyn kept her eyes closed longer than everyone else. When she opened them, she saw Caleb squeeze Lily's hand, saw Noah laughing at something the little girl said, saw a table full of imperfect people choosing repair over pride, and understood that this was the kind of power she had spent years trying to buy from the wrong places. 2 years later, at a national infrastructure conference in Washington, D.C., Liberty Corps was no longer remembered as the system that almost failed, but as the system redesigned because one overlooked father refused to stay silent. It powered emergency drills in VA hospitals across Virginia, Alabama, Texas, and Pennsylvania, supported storm shelters during tornado season, and became the model for a new federal standard requiring field technician review before critical infrastructure deployment. The Hands That Built America program employed more than 600 veterans, single parents, and skilled workers without traditional degrees, and Caleb trained every new class with the same rule written on the whiteboard. The person closest to the problem may be closest to the answer. On the morning of his keynote speech, Lily stood beside him backstage, wearing a navy blue dress, healthier now, taller, still carrying the same serious eyes that had once asked Evelyn whether leaders said sorry. Evelyn sat in the front row with Noah, no phone in her hand, no assistant whispering in her ear, just a quiet smile as Caleb walked to the podium. He looked out at executives, military leaders, engineers, and workers from across the country. Then he touched the small navy pin on his lapel and said, "A system is only strong when every honest voice is allowed to protect it. A company is only patriotic when it respects the Americans who build, fix, clean, test, and carry it. And a man is never useless when he is still willing to do the right thing after being treated wrong." The applause rose slowly, then fully, filling the hall with something larger than success. Caleb looked down at Lily and she mouthed, "You fixed it." This time he smiled, because he knew the truth. He had not only fixed a machine, he had helped fix a room, a company, a mother, a daughter's faith in her father, and a small part of a nation that too often forgets the quiet hands holding it together. Have you ever helped someone at their lowest moment, and discovered that your kindness changed their life forever? Drop a little heart in the comments if you believe love, kindness, and quiet strength are worth more than money, status, or any fortune. Subscribe for more emotional stories about second chances, hidden truth, and the moment a humble heart changes everything. Comment, "Love has no price tag," if you believe real kindness can change someone's life when they need it most.